Hello and welcome to another NYSAC News video update. This is actually our first video update of the year, so thank you for tuning in. My name is Ryan Gregoire. I am your association's legislative director, and I'm joined today by Dave Lucas, NYSAC Director of Intergovernmental Affairs and Finance, and Alex Regan, NYSAC's legislative and policy coordinator. Thank you both for taking the time to join us for our first video update. This week, Governor Hochul delivered her State of the State address, which really provides governors with an opportunity to outline their top policy priorities going into the new year and really showcase and highlight a few of the initiatives that we will expect to see when the governor presents her executive budget proposal next week on January 16th. So today's video update will focus on a recap of the State of the State and some of the initiatives that we heard the governor speak about and things that we're looking to see in this year's executive budget. So to kick things off, overall, the governor's State of the State really was a story of what we did not see, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing because the devils are always in the details, and we'll learn more when the executive budget proposal comes out. But until then, we wanted to recap State of the State, and let's start, Dave, with the financial outlook of our state, right? We got a lot of federal pandemic relief in the past. Where are we with that?
It's all spent at this point, and we're not the only state feeling this crunch right now. The federal money is gone. States do have pretty good amount of reserves, including New York. The financial plan has improved a little bit since the last update. We went from a $36 billion surplus to about a $32 billion deficit in a 12-month period. So it was a pretty big swing, but that $32 billion deficit over 4 years is cut back to about 17 because income tax results are coming in a little bit better and spending is lower than anticipated. And interestingly enough, one of the problems the state is having, which is a common problem the counties are having, is they can't hire anybody. So there's a lot of money set aside for positions, but they're not able to fill the positions. So that's one of the key problems with the state right now, as far as it's good from a revenue spending perspective, but they don't have staff filling positions. So those two things have helped improve the situation a little bit. We'll see next week when the details come out in the budget. But I mean, it is a manageable situation. A $4 billion deficit in the context of a $225 billion budget is really not that much money. Okay. I think the problem for the legislature and the governor is over the last several years, they've been doing dramatic spending increases, and this year they're not. It's kind of back to a normal budget cycle, and let's manage what we have. There's no ability to do big program launches or add significantly to existing piles of spending. So that's something they're going to have to manage.
Okay. Yeah. I think you just highlighted how this is a manageable situation. And I think what we heard from the governor in her State of the State really was more of a message that didn't have as many of these dramatic, large, new programs that come with a lot of expense. It was really a story of what we did not see, frankly, and we expect to see much more details next week when the budget comes out. But we didn't hear how she was going to address the $4.5 billion gap. We didn't hear how the governor was really going to deal with the migrant crisis that, for the most part, is really affecting New York City right now. But as we heard from Mayor Adams yesterday and throughout the last couple of months, this crisis is not going to stay within the confines of New York City. And we really need to be tackling this at a state level and at a national level. So we'll be interested to see what the governor presents in her executive budget with regard to addressing the budget deficit and the migrant crisis that's impacting us. But let's, jump right into it. One thing I wanted to start off with and this is an issue that's on everyone's minds across the state, is our situation of our emergency medical services and the crisis that EMS is really facing in New York. The governor included a couple proposals within her State of the State, which are supported by NYSAC. We've been pushing for them, including the ability to treat an individual or a patient at their residence or at the point of the location that they find themselves in when they call for EMS services. That is a great step in the right direction. Right now, EMS providers are only reimbursed if they actually transport an individual to an emergency room. The governor is proposing allowing them to be reimbursed for services rendered at the point of the individual's home or wherever they might be. So that's one positive thing. The other piece was the governor proposed deeming EMS as an essential service, which, if you think about it, really brings it in parity to our police services and our fire services. EMS would be an equal third leg of the stool, so to speak, with them. The key detail that was missing from the State of the State is how do we pay for that, which will have to be cognizant of what that looks like in her executive budget. There's a lot of different ways to fund EMS. It's across the state, EMS looks very different from county to county, and that requires different solutions. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, and I'm curious to see what the governor is going to include in her budget.
I just want to add something on the EMS situation. This is
Yeah.
a program or a service that has kind of disintegrated over the years in New York State. This is not normally a county function.
That's true.
We're having to step in because the other local governments are unable, in the private sector is unwilling to provide the service anymore because it's not profitable.
It's not profitable. They have staffing issues.
Yeah, so
Volunteerism is way down across the
yeah,
state.
so it is a problem that has to be addressed because I can't believe it's not an essential service. I mean, what could be more important than when someone's in fiscal distress or health distress it's not considered essential that someone goes and helps them. It's kind of an odd situation.
On this issue, for our members who are tuning in, stay tuned to NYSAC. We're going to be putting out a lot of advocacy material on the EMS crisis. We have started a coalition. We have a package of legislation. So stay tuned. We'll probably come back and dive into a little more detail on the EMS crisis. Dave, I want to go to you now to talk a little bit about what the governor included is in her address as far as housing goes.
Sure.
What do we see?
Yeah, there's a lot of focus on New York City, clearly, because that's the place where we have the biggest need for more affordable housing. It's just really expensive to live in the city, and housing is a big component of it. Some of the things they want to do, they want to reauthorize the 421A program that kind of expired a couple of years ago, and the legislature and the governor have gone back and forth. That's basically a tax abatement program that allows developers tax breaks as long as they set aside a certain number of their units to affordable housing or very low-income housing. That initiative just fell out of favor with the state legislature. So they've been trying to renew it, but that'll be a big one that they have to.
So that's a carrot for developers, really.
It's a carrot for developers in a way, and development has really fallen off the last couple of years. But that's not just because its abatement went away. We've had a pretty big increase in interest rates, so with the cost of doing these projects just gets harder and harder to get to a profitable point. Construction materials have gone up.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of issues around that, but that's something that really needs to be addressed. Is there going to have to be more incentives in the marketplace downstate, especially downstate and in the city. They want to give more flexibility to the city to establish greater density in certain areas. There are caps and limits, and it's kind of an antiquated system that's in place. And they want to kind of work around it. They want to allow the city to do some of the basement apartments and get those up to standard, and that could help fill some of the gap. They also want to provide fiscal incentives. This is similar to the 421 program to turn some of that commercial empty office space in New York City. The vacancy on any given day is still anywhere between 45 and 50%.
Wow.
So there's a lot of unused office space they'd like to convert over to housing. Excuse me. And then another thing the state is looking at is they're looking at their own state-owned properties.
Hmm.
And there's state-owned property all over the state. It could be vacant land. It could be an old youth facility. Excuse me.
An old state prison.
An old state prison. Some of it could be converted quickly to like transitional housing or something, but the state has never really looked at their properties closely. They think they have the ability to bring online 15,000 units
Mm.
of new affordable housing or housing in general, workforce housing, if they allow greater access to their own state-owned properties. This is something that a lot of the counties have been looking for, where they have basically retired state facilities in
Mm.
their jurisdiction, but they can't access the resource that's there. I mean, think about it. It's got most of the infrastructure you need. It's got water, it's got sewer, it's got power.
Yeah.
You might need some minor upgrades to do a bigger development, but having access to that property, especially in densely populated areas, that could be very valuable from a development perspective in bringing more housing online. So those are some things that the county saw that we really like.
Sure.
And we've been advocating for some time to look at state facilities and say, can we repurpose these or turn them over to the county and use them for some purpose, some governmental purpose, or for just providing services? So this is an area where they've done a deep dive. We think this is going to bear some fruit.
Okay, so the governor is kind of pivoting off of her housing message from last year, really taking, I guess, a new, fresh look at how to incentivize development, um, which is going to be interesting to see how that all fits into to play. I want to go to you, Alex, now to talk a little bit about what the governor had proposed in the state of the state with respect to environment, energy. I know there was a huge project that she wants to include in her budget to change the way that we site transmission, energy transmission lines. But outside of that proposal, maybe you can shed some light on some other environmental uh, suggestions that the governor has for the state.
Thank you, Ryan. So we've really seen in recent years that New York State has led on the environment. We're trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, transition to clean energy, protect New Yorkers from the most devastating effects of climate change. This year's State of the State was no different. It was very heavily focused on all of this, and especially resiliency. So this is protecting New Yorkers, their homes, their communities, their infrastructure from the most devastating effects of extreme weather, whether it be floods or other natural disasters. The governor is proposing a couple of new initiatives to increase our resiliency, particularly to flooding. She's proposing to launch the Resilient and Ready program, which will essentially create a fund that is intended to be flexible and to be used for fortifying areas that are in high flood risk communities. So if your home is at risk of flooding and needs repairs to be more resilient in the face of more extreme weather, this fund will hopefully provide you with some resources to do that. The governor is also proposing to create this Blue Buffers program, and the idea is to voluntarily buy out homes that are in the most vulnerable areas to flooding. And then in addition to that, she wants to update the state's building codes and standards so we have more resilient housing and buildings built going forward. Resiliency, though, wasn't her only focus. She's also helping us as local governments to increase our capacity to respond to climate change. This is something we've been asking for both at NYSAC and through our members for several years now, and it's great to see that we'll be getting some new tools and resources to both prepare for climate change and adapt as necessary. So one proposal that the governor explicitly included in the State of the State was to create new tools to help local governments prepare for climate impacts through this interactive web-based drought prediction tool, urban heat maps, modeling resources, projected floodplain mapping, and an update to the state's stormwater design manual. She also wants to develop a comprehensive adaptation and resilience plan. And the goal here is to help both the state and its departments, as well as local governments and their departments, equitably adapt to climate change. Another notable proposal is she wants to help counties and municipalities get the generators, high flow pumps, flood barrier technology they need. So she's calling on dishes to help supply counties with all of those resources. And then something else we were really happy to see was related to the Climate Smart Communities Grant Program. So right now, counties can get matching grants to implement different climate smart projects, though not all communities are able to take advantage of this because of the match. So the governor is proposing to lower the threshold for communities in disadvantaged areas that can't reach that 50% and enable them to take advantage of this program and the resources that are available there.
That's great, Alex. So, explain for folks listening today, where do you anticipate and expect the governor to find the financial resources to implement some of these initiatives?
That's a good question. There's a lot of efforts happening at the state level to pay for the transition away from fossil fuels into renewable energy. We'll be looking to see what the state legislature plans to do in this regard. There are proposals to tax the highest income earners in New York, to place more of the burden on the companies that have contributed most to the climate crisis. So we don't have really concrete solutions yet. Cap and trade, of course, is something that's being discussed, or cap and invest. So these are all, negotiations that are underway within Albany. We expect to see more details on the governor's executive budget and also through state agencies this year as they finalize their different regulations.
Certainly, and one thing I'm going to be looking for is, a breakdown of the Environmental Bond Act and how the state of New York is going to plan to spend that money. I think that'll be something that folks are interested in seeing. Alex, pivoting off of environment, can you talk a little bit about what the governor included in the State of the State with regard to cannabis?
The proliferation of illegal cannabis businesses continues to be an issue across New York State. We hear this from our members. We hear this from communities, all over the great state of New York. And the governor has really tried to crack down on this in a couple different ways. In last year's enacted state budget, there was legislation to increase the enforcement powers of both the Office of Cannabis Management and local governments. She's trying to do that again this year and even increase our capacity to close these unlicensed businesses. So she included in her State of the State address her intentions to introduce this new legislation. We're going to have to wait and see what the details are, but we know it will be related to cannabis enforcement, both for OCM, the Office of Cannabis Management, and local government. So counties will likely get some new powers here. We know that these businesses continue to operate, particularly in New York City. And so we're hoping that this solution will really help us to end these crack down on these illicit sales once and for all.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. And, there's a lot more detail in our State of the State analysis report. You can find that on the NYSAC website as well as NYSAC news clips. Dave, before we conclude with today's video update, I wanted to go to you to talk about an announcement that occurred at the same time as the State of the State with regard to Medicaid. And can you tell our listeners a little bit about what's going on with Medicaid?
Yeah, it was kind of amazing that on the same day that the State of the State came out, there was an announcement that the federal government was going to approve a broad Medicaid waiver that had been pending in D.C. for over a year with back and forth negotiations, and this was to build on the DSRIP waiver that expired a while ago, and this is a replacement. We're still trying to figure out the details because it sounds like they need to submit some more amendments to get the deal final. But there's a couple things in here that counties have been pursuing for a long time, not just in Albany, but even in D.C., trying to get federal legislation. One of the key ones, the idea behind this new waiver is to address a lot of health equity issues. So there's a lot of different groups that have worse health outcomes or need extra help in the process. And one of those groups is people leaving incarceration. So whether it's a state prison or a county jail, a lot of these people have co-occurring conditions, chronic disease, substance abuse, mental health issues, very prominent in that group of individuals. And what this waiver would allow is to enroll into Medicaid these individuals that are about to be released 30 days prior to their release.
This has been a huge thing that we've been pushing for many years at the federal level.
Yeah, and the White House has been supporting the concept of bringing these people onto Medicaid so you have a clean handoff, so to speak, when they go out into the community. Because right now they kind of just, sometimes they have a prescription saying, here, make sure you take it, and then there's no connection with a provider on the outside. So this would bring the provider inside, make the connection with the individual leaving incarceration, and making sure they have a follow-up plan when they get out. So that's a big thing. It helps reduce recidivism.
It's also going to reduce county health care costs.
Yeah, so it should, at least in the jail positions there, that it should lower some costs there potentially. Another issue is, which is sort of related to this topic, is to use Medicaid funds to provide for, to get at those, some of the issues around housing. So people that tend to have stable housing tend to have better health outcomes, those social determinants of health. So they want to expand some of the programs that are going on today in this waiver, and the federal government agrees that this is an idea that has a lot of merit, and it would potentially save on ED visits and other things down the road and get better health outcomes. So these two things combined are something that counties have been pushing for a very long time.
Yeah.
As I said, we'll understand the details better about the length and the amount of funding set aside for these two initiatives when the final deal is set and
She's going to have to include something in her budget, I'd imagine.
My guess is there will be something in the budget for this, and the time we'll review the timeline as far as how quickly they can ramp up these programs. The housing thing is something they're already doing in some degree, so that one probably can hit the ground running. The 30-day issue with the incarcerated, that might take a little bit more time.
But as long as the approval process is in place, in theory, we can start moving forward.
Yeah, it's a positive thing.
Great. So thank you for tuning into the NYSAC News video update. Again, this is our first episode. We're going to be bringing you many more as session gets underway here. We're just in the second week, the infancy of the 2024 legislative session. Again, my name is Ryan Gregoire, your association's legislative director, and I'm joined by Dave Lucas and Alex Regan. Thank you both so much for taking the time to join today's NYSAC News video update.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.